ever feel like you just as soon as one company comes out with like a really cool new idea, all of a sudden everybody's got their own version of it?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So today we're talking about knowledge spillovers.
Interesting.
So that's what happens when those ideas spread, and not always in ways that are, beneficial to the original person who came up with it.
Right.
So we're diving into some research today that comes from the International Journal of Industrial Organization.
Okay.
And they looked at data from 28 European countries.
Wow.
To see how a country's approach to IPRs, intellectual property rights,
Right.
affects innovation across different industries. So we're talking patents and copyrights, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
But isn't there always kind of a debate about whether strong IPRs actually help or hinder innovation?
Absolutely. It's a really fascinating paradox, right?
Yeah.
Because we all know knowledge is powerful.
Right.
And sharing it can lead to incredible progress.
Yeah.
But how do you protect the creators when ideas can spread so easily? That's where the study gets really interesting. They dive right into that debate. And they specifically looked at innovation spending as a measure of effort.
Okay.
Money doesn't guarantee groundbreaking results.
Right.
But it shows us where businesses are focusing their resources.
Right. It's a signal.
Exactly.
Okay, so what did this study reveal about the link between those IPRs and that innovation spending?
Well, before we get into the numbers, one of the things they did is they surveyed businesses across all these different countries.
Okay.
And what they found is actually pretty surprising. So businesses in countries with weaker IPRs were more likely to report that they struggled to get funding.
Really?
They had trouble finding partners, and they had trouble competing against those really big established companies.
I would have thought weaker IPRs would almost make it easier for like a new company to kind of get their foot in the door.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But imagine you're an investor and you're thinking about putting your money into a startup.
Right.
But the startup is in a country where it's really easy for somebody to just copy their idea.
Yeah, are you really going to want to take that risk?
Exactly.
No.
Probably not.
That makes sense.
So it seems like actually weak IPRs might create a system where those big companies, those established players, actually have an advantage.
So instead of like a level playing field, it's more like...
It's a jungle out there.
Yeah.
It's got to be tough to survive.
Yeah. So what did the researchers find when they actually looked at the data on innovation spending?
Well, they used a really sophisticated approach where they compared industries across countries.
Okay.
The ones with strong IPRs, the ones with weak IPRs.
Right.
And the results were actually really clear. Strong IPRs were linked to higher innovation spending.
Okay.
Particularly in research-heavy industries.
Like that.
Oh, pharmaceuticals, software development.
I gotcha. Okay, so those patents, those copyrights, they give companies more confidence to invest in that R&D.
Yeah, but then doesn't that just lead to a world that's dominated by just a few giant companies?
Right, that's my concern.
Right, that's what everybody thinks, right?
Yeah.
But this study found something really interesting.
Oh.
Strong IPRs were also associated with a much higher rate of new businesses entering the market.
Oh, okay.
And even more surprisingly, a higher rate of businesses exiting the market.
So more innovation, but like more churn?
Exactly. It's like a cycle, right, of creative destruction.
Right.
So if we think back to our idea about knowledge spillovers, what this suggests is that in those industries where ideas can spread really quickly, strong IPRs actually create an environment where new companies can emerge and really challenge the established players, shake things up a bit.
So it's not just about protecting like individual ideas.
Right.
It's about creating this whole ecosystem where that innovation can thrive.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay. But what about those companies that don't have the resources of those big players?
Right.
How do they fit into all this?
That's where the idea of absorptive capacity comes in.
Okay.
It's a company's ability to take in new knowledge, understand it, and use it effectively.
So it's not enough to just copy an idea.
Right.
You have to have the skills to build on it, to make it your own.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this study found that companies that are actively engaged in their own research and development, those are the ones that are really good at absorbing and using those knowledge spillovers.
Okay, so it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. But you mentioned earlier that the study pointed out two specific types of institutions that were important. One was copyright enforcement, but what was the other one?
It's a little bit technical. It's called legal formalism.
Oh, yeah.
But basically, it's about how predictable and efficient the legal system is.
So can businesses kind of confidently deal with disputes over intellectual property?
Exactly. Are the rules clear, or is it just a total mess?
Yeah, okay, so it's not just about having laws in the books, it's about how they're actually applied in the real world.
Exactly. And the study found that strong copyright protection coupled with a high degree of legal formalism, that was a really powerful combination for driving innovation.
Gotcha.
Especially in those R&D intensive industries.
Okay. So those industries, they seem to thrive when they have that kind of legal framework to protect intellectual property, but also a system where they can actually resolve disputes efficiently.
Exactly.
Makes sense. This all makes me wonder, though, did the researchers find any differences between the countries with strong IPRs versus weak IPRs in terms of the economic impact?
Oh, yeah.
Did it actually make a difference in the real world?
Absolutely. Huge differences, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so let's think back to our example of Bulgaria.
Right, with the weaker IPRs?
Yeah, weaker IPRs, exactly. And we'll compare that to the UK.
Okay, strong IPRs.
Yep. Stronger protections there. So the difference in innovation spending between the most research-heavy industries and the least research-intensive industries, that difference was 8.5% smaller in Bulgaria.
8.5%. That's a big gap.
It's a lot, yeah. It seems like weak IPRs really do discourage those investments.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's not just the money, right?
Oh.
The difference in new businesses entering those industries was also 5.5% smaller in Bulgaria.
So it's fewer new companies coming in.
Exactly. So it stifles the investment, but it also kind of prevents those new players from even getting started.
Right. But this whole conversation about strong versus weak IPRs makes me wonder, is there ever a case where weaker protections might actually be better?
That's a great question, and I think it's really important to remember that context matters.
Okay.
So this study, they focused on European countries, right?
Right.
With established economies, established legal systems, but things might look very different in developing economies.
Okay, so different playing field, different rules.
Exactly. So some people argue that in those contexts, weaker IPRs might actually encourage a more collaborative approach to innovation.
Okay. So instead of everybody being so secretive and protective, they might be more open to sharing.
Right. It becomes less about competition and more about kind of collective progress.
I could see that.
And you can imagine how that could be really valuable in agriculture or healthcare.
Right, where solving those big problems requires everyone to work together.
Exactly. So it's not that one system is better than the other. It's about finding the right fit.
The right tool for the job.
Right. And even within developed economies, there's still a lot of debate about whether the current IPR system is really striking that optimal balance.
Yeah, are we getting it right?
Right. Yeah. Some people argue that the way we focus on patents and copyrights now, it might actually be too restrictive.
Okay.
And make it harder to build on existing ideas.
So how do you find that balance?
It's tough. It's really about protecting those ideas, but also making sure that knowledge can still flow freely.
Right. So this study, though, it really highlighted the importance of protecting a wider range of intellectual assets.
Yes.
Not just patents.
Right. Not just patents.
Copyright enforcement, that played a big role, too.
Huge role. It suggests that we need to be thinking about designs, software, branding.
All the creative stuff.
All of it. All of that needs to be protected if we want to see innovation across all these different industries.
Okay. So it's about more than just the big scientific breakthroughs. It's about valuing that creative energy that goes into everything.
Exactly. But, before we move on, there's one other thing I wanted to mention.
Okay.
We always hear about how big companies, right, especially in tech, they're the most innovative. But is that really true?
Yeah, good question.
So this study, they actually found that while strong IPRs were linked to larger firm size, in those research-heavy industries, firm size itself didn't seem to be the main driver of increased innovation.
So bigger doesn't necessarily mean more innovative.
Not always. It's more complicated than that.
So maybe there are other things going on.
There's more to the story.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot today.
We have.
From knowledge spillovers to IPRs to firm size.
A lot of ground.
Yeah. As we kind of start to bring this conversation to a close, what are the key takeaways you want our listener to remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that innovation thrives in a dynamic environment, right?
Okay.
Where new ideas are constantly being generated, shared, built upon, and finding that balance when it comes to intellectual property, that's essential.
So too much protection could stifle things, but too little could make people hesitant to invest.
Yeah, it's tricky.
It's about finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. And I think as we try to figure all of this out,
yeah,
it's important to remember that innovation isn't a solo sport.
Oh, okay.
Right. It's interconnected. It's dynamic. It needs that free flow of ideas.
Right. But it also needs to reward the people who come up with those ideas.
Absolutely.
Right. Encourage them to take risks, to push the boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as our listener thinks about all of this, I think it's worth considering how this research challenges some of those assumptions that we have about how innovation works.
Okay.
Give me an example. So, we often talk about this idea of like a desired level of research and development.
Right. Like we need to be spending this much.
Exactly. Like there's this magic number.
Right.
But what if that desired level actually changes based on things like IPRs?
So the target's always moving.
Exactly. So think about those industries that traditionally spend very little on R&D.
Okay.
What if that's not because they're just not innovative industries?
Right.
But because the environment just doesn't give them the right incentives.
It's like they're stuck.
Exactly. But what if you change the rules of the game and give them stronger protections for their intellectual property?
Oh, so maybe we'd see a burst of creativity in those places.
Exactly. And that highlights how those policies around IPRs can have ripple effects
throughout the whole economy.
Exactly. And unlock innovation in unexpected places.
That's kind of exciting, right?
It is.
Like finding a hidden room in your house you never knew about.
Absolutely. But let's go back to this idea of knowledge spillovers for a second.
Okay.
So the study focused on how they impact innovation within specific industries.
Right.
But what about the bigger picture? What if they're driving innovation across industries?
So like breakthroughs in one field spark ideas in another.
Exactly.
Like how the internet revolutionized, well, pretty much everything.
Exactly. And this study kind of hints at the idea that strong IPRs might actually amplify those cross-industry spillovers.
Okay.
And create this cascade of innovation across the entire economy.
It's like a chain reaction.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, so where do we go from here? We've explored the impact of IPRs. Knowledge spillovers, firm size.
We've done a lot.
Yeah. What's the final thought you want to leave our listener with? Yeah, it really makes you think, what could be possible if we kind of just shook things up a little bit?
And that's what's so cool about this research. It gives us a new how to think about these things,
Right. But going back to that idea of those ripples spreading out, I'm curious, how can we as individuals kind of contribute to that?
I think it starts with curiosity,
Okay.
Just be open to new ideas. Even if they come from places you wouldn't expect, don't be afraid to ask questions,
Okay, so like embrace that beginner's mind.
Exactly.
Even if you're already an expert.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of working with other people.
Okay.
Share your ideas,
Right.
Get different perspectives.
Yeah.
Be willing to collaborate to solve those tough problems.
Two heads are better than one, right?
Sometimes, yeah. And you never know where that next great idea is going to come from.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And as we have those conversations, as we build those connections, what else should we keep in mind?
Respect the power of ideas.
Okay.
Give credit where credit's due.
Right.
Recognize the contributions of others.
Yeah.
Create that environment where everybody feels comfortable sharing.
So it's not just about the legal stuff. It's about building that culture of respect.
Yeah, where those ideas can actually grow.
Cool. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of knowledge spillovers and innovation.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this has sparked some new ideas for you and encouraged you to keep pushing those boundaries, keep exploring, and keep asking those tough questions. Until next time, stay curious.